All right. So thanks everybody for the information that you've shared from both groups. It was fantastic information, and we're really excited to be able to go through some of the questions. You've obviously touched on some points that everybody was really interested in talking about, because we have a load of questions for you. So I'm not sure that we'll get through them all, but we'll do our best. And I'm happy to say that some of the questions that I had written down that I threatened you with before are questions that other people have asked. So I'm happy that those ones will probably get touched on. I'm also really excited to note that Diana, who we just heard about at the end, is with the group from Halifax as well. So thank you for your story, and thank you for being here, and all that you've done to help people understand that this is possible. So thanks a lot for joining us today. All right, I'm just going to go through the questions from beginning to end as much as possible. Now, the first question is one that I think is for both groups. So whoever wants to speak to it can, and it was touched on, but this is from Natalie, who says, we have been seeing a lot of homeless single fathers with children starting to come through our doors. We only have an adult shelter, and our DV shelter is only for women, which does allow children. How do other cities deal with single dads with children? And what do you do to accommodate these fathers in smaller hubs where there's not many options for them? So I don't know, whoever wants to begin, jump in, but single dads with kids, it's a challenge, it's difficult. What are your suggestions?
Yeah, sure. Wally, I know in Waterloo region, we don't have a specific shelter for single dads with kids, but our family shelter, we used to have beds at the YW shelter, which is a women's shelter, and that's where our families were. In the past year, our shelter has now moved and all families are in motels. But even when it was in the shelter system, our women's shelter was actually taking in the single dads with children, but children had to be in the care of the dad in order for him to access the women's shelter. So they wouldn't be accessing the men's shelter, but they were accessing the women's shelter.
Oh, great. Okay, super. Any other thoughts from?
I can speak to that as well. Thank you. Yeah, similar to Lori, and it sounds like across Canada, there's just not a lot of options for single dads. And that was kind of one of the impetuses of us beginning diverting families, because there's no place for them to go. So we also started with a hotel model, kind of like working with dads so they had an option and a place to go with their kids. And now we kind of prioritize that, because right now they're the population that really doesn't have any place to go. So hopefully even kind of like looking at stats, maybe from these presentations, and then kind of taking that to government and saying that this is working, and this is how many people can be supported, or collecting your request for services, say this population is growing, this is actually an issue, of kind of taking that forward and highlighting awareness of that could be kind of like a starting point. I haven't kind of started that way already.
Okay, super, thank you. The next question came from Megan, and this is really for Lutherwood, and it's probably a quick answer. How many family shelter beds do you have?
So when we were in the shelter, we did have about 6 that were available there. Now we're not in the shelter, and we're in the motels. So we don't have a specific amount. We can use as much as needed. I will say, however, sometimes we get to the point where we need to kind of pre-book some rooms. So, when before COVID, all of a sudden we'd have Oktoberfest that time of year, and the motels were very booked. So you might have to do some pre-planning and some pre-booking to ensure that if a family does come during that time, we do have beds available.
Yeah, okay. So Helen's asked an interesting question, about what all of you folks would say are the leading causes of family homelessness. There's multiple things that you could consider, like family breakdown or divorce, but then there's also eviction and violence and addictions and everything else. Do any of you have a sense of what you would say are the leading causes of the family aspect of homelessness?
I would say that What we are seeing is poverty, a lot of evictions, a lot of systemic issues, I would say, related to income support programs. So one of the things that we were identifying in our region is, as soon as a family stopped their rent pay direct to the landlord, they would get arrears, and then sometimes they wouldn't reach out until the sheriff came and locked them out. And so we really had to go a little bit upstream and figure out what some of those interventions could look like to prevent families from falling into homelessness because they chose not to pay their rent because they're living in poverty. And of course, life happens. So one of the strategies we used in our region is we initiated a service called Third Party Pay Direct. So for some of those families who repeatedly were becoming homeless because of some system gaps with rent not getting paid when they were dependent on income support programs. So we have the income support program pay us and we pay the landlord. And if there's an interruption in the rent payment, we don't get the rent. The landlord still gets the rent. And then we go after the income support program for whatever interruption there was. So I would say poverty and money management is probably the leading cause in our, from what we're seeing.
Halifax folks, do you have any other additional responses?
Definitely, I agree with what you're saying. Poverty is a huge factor. Some of the ones that you had mentioned, intimate partner violence, relationship breakdowns. Also along with sometimes when people become widowed. Another one that we see often is when families experience CPS involvement. Even if the child is taken into care briefly, a lot of people are dipping into their child tax in order to pay rent. And even if the plan is reunification, a lot of times that will cause arrears and lead to eviction. So we're seeing that a lot.
Yeah. Okay. So this next question, I'm actually going to combine two questions as well as it was one that I had. So Nathaniel and Travis have both asked kind of a similar question. It's related to discharge. And I think it came more from what was talked about in the Lutherwood presentation. And it's sort of like, what is the plan? What is the outlook? What is the next step for a family that has been discharged? And then Travis's question, and so my question was, what actually happens at the if you give a letter and the 14-day point does arrive and there hasn't been a change in their plan or anything like that? What's sort of the outcome, and is there flexibility or discretion then in what you do at the end of that 14 days?
There's always flexibility, there's always discretion, and that is a last resort, not a first. Yeah. It's a tool to engage families. Sometimes we have families who they really just want to get into rent geared to income housing and they don't want to engage in a market rent search, and we know that's going to take years. I know there was another question in the chat around how long does it take. It takes years, literally, and we can't maintain families in our shelter system for as long as it takes to get a subsidized housing unit offer. So if we do have to ask a family to leave because they're not engaging, they almost always find somewhere to go. Like they go to a family's house. Sometimes they leave our region and they engage in a different type of program that we may not have in our region, or they make a choice to do something different than what they initially planned on doing. So reconciling with a partner, or moving to a different province, going to a different city, because what they're looking to obtain in our region isn't available in our region, and they get to that place of decision making.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. Travis has a question. He says, I'm a diversion rapid rehousing worker with Guelph region. Our process is very similar. I'm wondering on the landlord engagement piece, have you found more success if the rapid rehousing worker works with the client to reach out to landlords as themselves, or if it's more successful if the rapid rehousing worker connects with the landlords directly? Thoughts on that?
That's a great question for Caitlin. She's a rapid rehousing worker.
Do you have Caitlin? I don't see Caitlin all of a sudden. Yes.
I can
She's
see her, but I
muted.
can't hear her. Caitlin, are you muted still?
Oh, there we go. No, we can't hear you.
Diana would like to speak a little bit to that. So maybe while Caitlin's kind of sorting out the audio thing, Diana can kind of offer.
Please.
Yeah, so when I was going through everything, and this also goes to having children, and you know, my boys are biracial. Sometimes a person with a title, landlords take you as more serious. So as much as you want to reach out yourself, you eventually hit a brick wall. And there's still stereotypes to people on IA, like income assistance, or any subsidized housing. So sometimes if you have a title behind you when it's like an emergency situation, it really does help from a personal opinion. Because I do know that I ran into different stereotypes, especially when I was trying to get housed after being homeless.
Yeah, so it almost sounds like a sort of that joint effort, that supportive effort is what's helpful.
And when we were doing it, I have to say, when you're working with someone to get them housed, the biggest success and the reason why I was housed so quickly is because I had to put in the work. So you really need to get your clients to put in their effort. You can't just you have to almost let them get to the point where they have to do it themselves and then just guide them, but not do it for them. Because if you do it for them, they're not going to learn and they're going to end up back in the situation. So I pushed really hard to get where I was. And I think that's why I was housed so quickly.
Yeah, great advice. Great
Caitlin,
advice.
is it working now? Still not working. Okay, so I think absolutely what Megan was saying as well. And I think we really need the clients to be working with us, but some landlords prefer the client directly to work with them, and some landlords prefer us to work with them. So it's really getting to know the landlords and what they prefer, because some of them are like, nope, I want them to call, I want them to come to the viewing themselves, I want them to apply themselves. So really getting to know your sector and which landlords kind of prefer which, but we're also always there for those landlords that do prefer that for any questions they have.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, great. So I know we're slightly over the time. I have two final questions I want to throw out. One is with the emergency units that are talked about, who owns those?
So with our emergency units, our organization holds the master lease. So we're engaging with the landlord and we're signing those master leases. And then we're kind of subleasing for short term to folks on an emergency basis while we work to secure housing elsewhere. And sometimes it just happens that it's a really great fit between the client and the landlord. And then there can be what we call a lease takeover, where they then just stay in the unit, sign their own lease, and continue on.
Okay, great. And then lastly, Megan wants to know how the materials on your landlord engagement strategies, right, both organizations, can they get access to those materials, or what would you recommend in terms of getting that kind of information?
We are absolutely able to kind of share any materials that anyone wants. There's no point in reinventing the wheel. And if we have something that we've already developed, please take it and use it and make it your own. So I think in our presentation, we put up both April and myself our email. So we're happy to kind of follow up on any questions, send intakes, documents, whatever that you need to kind of get this going. We're happy to kind of send those on.
And if you go to the participant profiles in the platform, you should be able to get that contact information as well, in case you don't get access to the slides. Maybe you're chomping at the bit and you want that material tomorrow. Then, you know, go get the email off the platform, send it off to any of the folks in the presentation, and I'm sure they'd be happy to get you whatever they can yesterday. So thank you again, everybody, for all of your hard work at preparing this information, but most importantly, all your hard work in just supporting individuals like Diana. And again, Diana, thank you for coming and sharing your story with us. I want to remind everybody to do the evaluation. You should see the link at the top of the screen, and it's really helpful for us. Thanks to all the participants and your questions. It was very engaging. It was a great session. Thanks a ton, and we'll see everyone later on. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.